Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Um, so one announcement that I have is, and you should have gotten an email from Ansley by now, and Ansley compiled the review for exam number 2, and it is now posted in the announcements on the web courses. So be sure to check it out and go over the review in detail. Like I would suggest writing the answers or writing kind of expanded notes under the review questions. It will if you do that for each point, you will have no problem getting an A on the exam, okay? And I look out on the web courses for the announcements about the exam logistics. In short, it's going, some of the, all of the rules implemented in the previous exam will be true for exam 2 as well. Like starting at 9:30 a.m. The new rule will be to not leave the web browser tab, the exam browser tab, after you have started the exam. If you do, I will assume you have cheated and give you a 0 for the exam, okay? So treat it as if you would take an exam in class. I mean, you would start the exam in class on time at 9:30, and you would not look at anything but the exam in class as well, because if you do, one of the proctors would have noticed it and would have called you out, and you would have gotten a 0 on the exam in class as well. Any questions about logistics and review and exam in general?
I'm sorry. So are we using lockdown browser?
We are not using the lockdown browser, Diamond. A lot of students could not make it work on their computers, and web courses did not help in figuring out the issue. So I decided to go with the regular browser and enforce the rules like similar to the lockdown browser. So technically you can leave the browser on the exam, but please don't, because I will see it on the log, and you will get a 0 if you leave a browser tab, because I'm telling you now, I will assume that you will look up the answers. Okay, so if you have any notifications, any apps that kind of pop up that you have to manually close, then disable those apps. So you can go into settings in your computer and disable the pop-up apps to prevent these situations, to prevent leaving the browser tab. If you're on the website like my UCF, after 15 minutes or so, it will give a pop-up to you. So just to be sure that these situations don't happen, I would advise just having one exam tab open in your browser and just take the exam, spend these 45 minutes or less on the exam itself, and then like open up everything else that you usually have open on your computer.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, Diamond. Any other questions? All right, I'll switch to the lecture then. So a couple of reminders. We still have a quiz due on March 5th, on Friday, and it was quiz number 6. And what else? Quiz 7 opens on March 6th, and it is going to be due next week, at the end of the next week on Friday. And there is no participation assignment due for today, so no things to do there. So last lecture, I didn't quite finish the circulatory system and respiration, so I will finish it up today and move on to digestion and nutrition. Hopefully we'll finish today, but if not, there's not going to be much to go over on Friday. And on Friday, I'm going to go over the immune system, and I will leave 15 minutes of the lecture for the questions that you might have about the study guide. Anything that is not clear, or any questions about the material related to the exam. Okay, so the lecture on Friday, we're still going to go over some material on immune system and maybe a little bit on the digestion. And afterwards, 15 minutes, you have that time to ask questions about the exam. So just to reiterate how the blood works within the heart, the oxygen-poor blood collected from around the body drains into superior vena cava, and the superior vena cava drains into the right atrium. So the right atrium contains the blood that is poor in oxygen. Now, from the right atrium, blood moves into the right ventricle, and the ventricle is the part of the heart that actually contracts. And you can see these pink things that line the heart boundaries, the heart, what do you call it? It's not a membrane quite, but there is a connective tissue over here, and here is the muscle tissue in pink. So this muscle tissue contracts and pumps the oxygen poor blood into the lungs. In the lungs, blood enriches with oxygen, returns to the left atrium, and from the left atrium, the blood drains into the left ventricle. The left ventricle has much more muscle tissue compared to the right ventricle. Note that, and the left ventricle contracts, pushes the blood into the aorta, and from aorta, oxygen-rich blood gets everywhere else inside the body. Okay. Any questions about this mechanism of how the blood moves within the heart, how it enriches with oxygen, and so on? Okay. So the heart itself needs blood supply too. And from aorta, there's this vessel, well, it's not shown here, but there's a direction from the aorta that the blood flows into the heart itself, like on the outside of the heart. So these arteries are called coronary arteries, and they branch off from the aorta and bring oxygen-rich blood to the heart. And then a vein entering the right atrium returns the blood that has been circulating within the walls of the heart. So when these coronary artery is blocked, it's the most common cause, the blockage of the coronary artery is the most common cause of the heart attack. Okay, I'm looking through the questions. So the left atrium is the one that receives oxygenated blood. Yes, Diego, and Ainsley just answered it too. So the left atrium is the atrium that receives the blood from the lungs. And if the blood is coming from the lungs, it means that it has been enriched with oxygen. Can you repeat the steps of the heart? Okay, Nicholas, I'm just gonna go over, go forward with this, and if you can review this particular part of the recording. Okay, so the next two slides are basically going to repeat what I've said about during the slide about the heart, about how the heart goes around, how blood goes around from lungs to the lungs, where does it enter there. The following two slides are just going to spell it out, okay? It's for you to review later. So here's the schematic representation of the circulatory system. And there are some steps outlined here that basically repeat what I've said so far. So I'm just going to leave it here. I'm not going to go over them, but I'm going to leave the notes here for you to go over later so that you have this mechanism in words, so that you may not, like if you don't want to rewatch the recording, you don't have to, you will have these slides in your notes. So exercise does a lot of good to us because it strengthens the heart. The amount of blood pumped each minute is called cardiac output. It is kind of a characteristic of our circulatory health, and it is determined by the heart rate and the strength of the heart. The strong heart muscles pump more blood with each stroke than weaker muscles, and it's very important for us to exercise because the bottom line of this exercise is it's good for the heart. It strengthens the heart, and if the heart pumps blood more efficiently, we feel better because our tissues are more saturated with oxygen, and oxygen is required for, remember, for energy, for the cellular energy. And if cells are happy and energetic, we feel happy and energetic as well. So WHO, or World Health Organization, recommends about 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. And how do you determine the moderate exercise? It's by the heart rate. So the target heart rate for the moderate and intense exercise changes as we age. So the theoretical maximum decreases as we age, and correspondingly, the target heart rate, which is calculated as percentage of the theoretical maximum heart rate, also decreases as we age. So if you're 20, you can exercise within this heart rate range. But if you reach the age of 40, you shouldn't get your heart rate up to 170. Like you can run on a treadmill and your heart rate can get above 170, and it is considered to be like high intensity interval. So this is the interval for like there's first of all, you shouldn't train for a long time in the range of when your heart rate is at 170 beats per minute. Like it's good for a minute or two just to give the heart this extra hard exercise, but no more than a couple of minutes. Okay, you shouldn't like be in 170 range when you exercise for a long time. But if you're, for instance, 40, then you shouldn't get your heart rate to 170 at all, because the cardiac output is not as good, and there's a good chance you will feel very badly if your heart rate goes up to 170 when you exercise on a treadmill. Um, Lauren asks, what is a resting heart rate average? It ranges between 60 and I want to say like 80 something. So if your resting heart rate is below 60, is considered bradycardia or a slow heart rate. But I don't know. I have a friend who is an athlete, and he has been playing tennis for like since he was 7 until he was like 35, and his resting heart rate was like 45. And doctors always got scared when he measured his when he gave like he went to the doctor, because doctors thought, oh, he's bradycardic and he's gonna pass out any minute. But no, his heart rate was just, his heart was very trained, and his cardiac output was very efficient. So one pump of the heart was enough to like pump blood everywhere, and he was feeling fine. So the athletes marathon runners, athletes who do a lot of cardio, their resting heart rate tends to be lower compared to people who do not do cardio. So like I was out of shape for some period of my life, and my resting heart rate was at 90, which was pretty high. And I mean, that's not good to do as well. So usually when you start doing some cardio exercises, you will notice that your resting heart rate will move closer to 60. So Christine asks, if you go over, you can get chest pain, right? If you go over 170 beats per minute, you could. And if you get chest pain, stop exercising immediately and go to the doctor as soon as you can. Okay. What else do I have here? What is the side effect of going over the target heart rate? You will feel dizzy, you may get chest pain, and you may pass out. Well, I'm sorry, not that. So target heart, if you go over the upper limit of the target heart rate, you will not feel well. You may get dizzy, because the blood will not oxygenate your tissues very well. And because you will not get enough oxygen in your tissues, including your brain cells, you might pass out. Or puke, that's another side effect of overtraining. More immediate one. Okay, moving on. You probably heard about blood pressure, and I just want to stop for a little bit here and tell you what the blood pressure is if you don't know it yet. So blood pressure is literally the force the blood exerts on the blood vessels, and it can be measured using this thing called sphygmomanometer. And the sphygmomanometer gives you two readings. The units of the reading are the millimeters of mercury, and it is pretty out of date measurements, and it comes from the past. Basically, sphygmomanometer used to be measured in like literally mercury. So the pressure, there would be this vessel filled with mercury, and the pressure in the blood vessels was basically recorded by where the mercury was within the blood vessel, within this vessel that contained the mercury. Uh, so the upper reading, you will get two readings, the upper and the lower reading. The upper reading, or the higher reading, it reflects the pressure in the arteries when the ventricles contract. So when the ventricles is contracted, this produces the higher reading of the sphygmomanometer. And the lower reading correspondingly reflects the pressure in the arteries when the ventricles relax, okay? The normal reading is basically, the normal higher readings are between 100 and 120, and the normal lower readings are between 60 and 80. So if you have anything above or below those normal readings, you will likely feel the effect, and it's not good for your health. So why the higher readings are not for your health? The higher readings are not, high blood pressure is not good for your health because it exerts more force. It puts more um, force against your blood vessels. And as you age, your blood vessels become more fragile. So the high blood pressure, especially in the older age, can cause the blood vessels to burst. And if a blood vessel bursts inside your brain, that triggers a stroke. That is a stroke, and it can cause devastating consequences. Now, low blood pressure is not good as well. And based on what I've discussed so far, can anybody guess why the low blood pressure is not good?
You can faint.
That's exactly right, Christine. So, for instance, if your blood pressure is 90 over 50 or 80 over 50, then you will feel very weak. And if you get up like very fast, you may feel dizzy. You may feel like your vision is going away. Everything is getting dark, and you start seeing things as if you're in a tunnel, and you may pass out, and your heart starts racing. So the heart starts racing when your blood pressure is low, when you get up, is it's the automatic response of the body. The body produces this automatic response to raise the blood pressure, and the body tries to stress itself out with the racing heart to kind of get you back in tone, get your blood pressure back into the normal tone again. But sometimes it doesn't work, and a person passes out.
What was the range for the bottom number?
60 to 80. Okay, any questions about the blood pressure? Okay, moving on. So breathing. Moving on to the second part of the circulation and respiration. So breathing starts in the upper respiratory system. Air enters through the nose or through the mouth. If the air enters through the nose, it passes like to the pharynx and then to the trachea. And if we can breathe through our mouth, and the air from the mouth goes exactly the same way, bypassing the nose, obviously, it goes into the pharynx and then into the trachea, larynx and trachea. Note that we also eat food through the mouth. So why would the food go into into the digestive system, and air would not go into the digestive system? The reason for that is the presence of the epiglottis. So every time we swallow, this epiglottis, or flap that covers the trachea, every time we swallow, the epiglottis covers the trachea so that we don't swallow the food into our trachea, into our respiration system. And whenever we don't swallow, the epiglottis remains open so that the air can go into the trachea and into the lungs. So the breathing gas exchange occurs in the structures within the lungs called alveoli. So each alveolus is a tiny sac with a wall of epithelial tissue that is one cell layer thick. And oxygen and CO2, carbon dioxide, diffuse through the thin walls of the alveoli, and the neighboring capillaries. So within the lungs, lungs has bronchi. Bronchi branch out onto bronchioli, and at the end of the bronchioli, we have alveoli, the structures of the lungs where the actual gas exchange happens. So it's useful to think about alveoli as these gas sacs, mini gas sacs, lined with capillaries. So oxygen poor blood gets into like flows in the capillaries around the alveoli, and because there is a gradient of concentration of oxygen and CO2, some CO2 of the oxygen poor blood will escape into alveoli, and some O2 is going to move from the alveoli into the capillaries and into the blood. So, yeah, go ahead. Dylan, did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. My dog jumped on my computer.
That's okay. Hi, dog. Um, So once oxygen enters from the alveoli into the capillary, it binds to the hemoglobin, or the protein within the red blood cells the function of which is to carry oxygen. And CO2, once it enters the alveoli, it doesn't stay there for long because we breathe it out. Whenever we breathe out CO2, well, and some oxygen too, that did not get taken up by the blood. All right. Any questions about the alveoli and how do we gain oxygen and how do we lose CO2? Good, everything is clear, eh? Finally, breathing is controlled by a negative feedback of blood acidity. pH stands for acidity. So our breathing occurs automatically. Our breathing is controlled, if you remember, by the medulla oblongata. So how does the brain know when to send the signal to the lungs to expand and when to send the signal to contract? Or basically, how does the brain know when to maybe speed up our breathing and when to slow it down? And the answer to that is the concentration, the acidity of the blood. Like the brain will go by the acidity of the blood to determine whether to speed up respiration rate or slow it down. So how does breathing connected to the acidity? The CO2 concentration in the blood kind of changes the acidity. If the CO2 concentration in the blood is high, then the blood will be more acidic. If the CO2 concentration is low, then the blood will be less acidic. So CO2. So whenever CO2 dissolves in the liquid, it increases its acidity. It's the same principle in the oceans. Like you probably have had like basic ecology classes, or even in your grade school science class, you know that ocean is becoming more acidic. And why is it becoming more acidic? Because there's more CO2, carbon dioxide in the air. We're emitting lots of carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide from the air dissolves into the ocean, making ocean more acidic and causing coral bleaching and all of the other bad stuff. So within our bodies, a similar thing kind of happens, where the CO2 that is produced by carbon dioxide that is produced by the cells within our body, they dissolve in the in lymph, which is 97% of water, 95% of water, and this lymph becomes more acidic because of the CO2. And so whenever the CO2 concentration becomes too high, pH is too low, and low pH means the high acidity. So whenever this happens, in medulla, neurons that trigger inhalation are stimulated. And once these neurons are stimulated, the breathing rate increases. If the breathing rate increases, then more oxygen gets into our blood and more CO2 it gets expelled from our body. And that returns the normal concentration of CO2 in blood. However, if the concentration of CO2 is too low, that means that blood pH is too high. High pH means less acid. And within the medulla, neurons that trigger inhalation are inhibited and our breathing slows. Okay. All right. Any questions about this negative feedback? Okay, moving on to digestive system and nutrition. This slide kind of contains some information on the urinary system as well, and so the urinary system basically regulates our water content, and the digestive system partly regulates our water content, but mostly it provides it helps us absorb nutrients and basically nourish our bodies. So digestive system breaks down the nutrients in food and eliminates the solid waste as feces, whereas urinary system eliminates the water-soluble waste and determines the volume composition of body fluids. And does anybody remember the hormone that regulates the water? It's called ADH. What does it do? Madeline, thank you. That's exactly right. So ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone. And does anybody remember like what exactly it does? It somehow affects the kidney cells. Somebody unmuted. Madeline, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna guess because I don't exactly remember, but because it's antidiuretic, it keeps the water in your body long enough for the water to replenish your cells.
Right. So antidiuretic hormone stimulates the cells in the kidneys, and so cells in the kidneys can either direct the water like to the bladder, or it can direct the water back to the blood. So whenever the concentration of antidiuretic hormone is high, then the cells within the kidneys will return the water back to the blood. Whenever the concentration of the antidiuretic hormone is low, then the cells of the kidneys will direct the water into the bladder and out of the body.
I have a quick question about the antidiuretic hormone. If someone drinks a lot of like coffee or soda or energy drinks or something that's not water, does that throw off your hormone?
Not necessarily. No, it's the coffee itself has a diuretic effect, meaning it doesn't stay in the body for long, and it will be expelled faster from the body, and it kind of facilitates water loss. But I don't think it's caused by antidiuretic hormone. It's just the effect of the molecules, the chemicals within the coffee on the kidney cells. So I'm not sure it's the hormone is involved here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so food is the source of nutrients. We get our nutrients through eating and drinking. And we are animals, so animals use nutrients in food to fuel cellular respiration and to build their tissues. We need nutrients for it to grow. We need nutrients to maintain our internal homeostasis. And we need nutrients to rebuild tissues if the tissues get damaged. And tissues get damaged all of the time. Some cells die, and we need nutrients for additional cell division to replenish those dead cells. There are basically these nutrients are the major types of nutrients that we need. We need carbs for energy. We need proteins to build muscle. We need lipids to maintain internal constancy. We need lipids because they don't contain the kind of nutrients and the kind of chemicals that are contained in protein and carbohydrate. So if we if we eat a lot of lipids, which fats are a type of lipids. Like some people believe that if you eat a lot of fat, you will become fat. That is not necessarily true. And the proof to that is this diet called Atkins diet. It was crazy popular in the beginning of 2000s. And Atkins diet is basically restricting carbs and eating proteins and lipids. And basically, people who restricted carbs tend to be more in shape than people who did not restrict carbs. So in Atkins diet, you eat a lot of fats and protein, and you still stay in shape. So if you believe that eating a lot of lipids or fats causes you to be fat, that's not accurate. That's not true. If you eat a lot of carbs and fats, though, yep, you'll get there. So we need water because water is part of blood. Water is part of many other systems within our body, and we need it to be at the constant level. So we need to replenish water constantly. We need vitamins and minerals. So a reminder about from the back when we studied energy. So food is the potential energy. Food contains this lots of organic molecules that store potential energy in their covalent bonds. And the potential energy, when we eat the food, inside our bodies, that potential energy is converted to ATP, and some of it is used to create new cells, etc. So growth and what requires energy. I've also already covered like the metabolism, growth. Also, reproduction requires more energy, and as well as just need nutrients to maintain our processes. So baby animals like these birds usually require much more food in percentage of their weight than adults. And the reason for that is because the young organisms, they grow at more rapid rates. So they need that potential energy to build new tissues. They need that potential energy to grow. All right, digestive system is made up of multiple organs, and those organs go beyond just the like intestine, stomach, and so on, the straight pathway from mouth to anus, okay? Some of the other organs that participate in digestions that is not like mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and so on, are liver. Liver produces bile, which helps us digest fat. It emulsifies fat, and meaning it breaks down fat into these smaller particles and helps us absorb the nutrients from fat. We have another gland called pancreas. So pancreas helps us digest lots of nutrients. It helps us get lots of nutrients by producing the digestive enzymes and bicarbonate ions also these enzymes are dumped into the small intestine, where a lot of nutrients are absorbed. So the other parts of the digestive system are mouth. We have salivary glands in the mouth that secretes saliva, helps us to chew the food and to get it down our throats and into our stomachs. And also saliva contains some enzymes that initiate breakdown of carbs. So we have teeth that help us mechanically break down the food. We have the tongue also causes some mechanical breakdown of the food function. We have pharynx that connects the mouth to the esophagus. The food moves down to the esophagus and into the stomach, which has high acidity, which has very low pH. And within the stomach, the food starts to break down. This very low pH causes the softening and breakdown on the food. And some of the nutrients are uptaken in the stomach as well. And these nutrients need the low pH or high acidity to be uptaken. For instance, calcium, to absorb sufficient amount of calcium, we need the stomach to have this low pH level. We need the high acid content in the stomach. By the way, does anybody know what kind of acid is contained in the stomach? Hydrochloric acid. The chemical formula for it is HCl. So from the stomach, food moves into the small intestine to where the pancreatic enzymes are dumped, and as well as the enzymes from, well, as well as bile from the liver. A lot of nutrient absorption happens in the small intestine, and from the small intestine, food moves into the large intestine, where absorptions of water and minerals continues to take place. And most of the water actually is absorbed in the large intestine. And from the large intestine, food eventually moves into the anus, and undigested food is expelled through the anus. Okay. So the smooth muscles line the intestines and the esophagus and the stomach, and they help they help the food to move along. Okay, and so smooth muscles, we don't control the smooth muscles. We don't have voluntary. We cannot contract them voluntarily. They contract and relax automatically. And what they do, the movement of these muscles is called peristalsis. And peristalsis basically moves the food along, like that's its main function. If we didn't have smooth muscle, lining our esophagus, lining our stomach, lining our intestines, then we would only rely on the gravity to move the food along. And that would not be enough, because the gravity probably would do a good job moving the food from the mouth into the stomach. But after the stomach, we would run into the problems, because you see how the intestines are kind of packed onto each other and are curvy. So if we only relied on gravity to move the food along, the food would get stuck basically in the small intestine. It would not move much further from there. So these smooth muscles that line the esophagus, that line the stomach and line the intestine, they contract and relax, and these contractions and relaxation motions, it basically moves the food further down the digestive tract. So some of the other muscles, apart from the small muscles, we have two round muscles called sphincters lining the entry and the exit of the stomach. So sphincters are muscular rings that contract to block the passage of materials. So we have the sphincter at the entry of the stomach. If there's no food right here, the sphincter remains closed. If the food kind of approaches the stomach, the sphincter opens and letting the food in. And same situation in here. If there is no food, the sphincter remains tight. If there's food approaching the sphincter, the sphincter relaxes and lets the food through. If the sphincter over here, if the sphincter in the esophagus is weak, then you may feel symptoms of heartburn, for instance, or you may have like ate too much at some point. And if you eat too much, your stomach stretches, and the stretch of the stomach affects the sphincter muscle here. The sphincter relaxes, like it stretches out, letting the food and more importantly, the acid, hydrochloric acid from the stomach into the esophagus. And you feel this burning in your chest, which is basically the acidic burn of your esophagus.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Is that kind of like acid reflux? Because I thought acid reflux was when like the sphincter, like it doesn't close all the way or something like that.
That's exactly acid reflux. So the weakness of the sphincter muscle causes acid reflux. And this is because the hydrochloric acid from the stomach exits into the esophagus and burns it. So I kind of mentioned it before a few lectures ago, that the tissues lining the stomach, they are not damaged by the acid. But the tissues in the esophagus, they do not have the same structure as the tissues in the stomach. So esophagus is readily damaged by the acid, whereas the stomach, well, does not. It contains this acid. And so acid reflux basically is when your esophageal sphincter opens for one reason or another. It can be weakening of the muscle itself, or it can be overeating and just stretching the stomach to the point that your esophageal sphincter stretches as well and lets the acid through.
What happens if the bottom sphincter is like weak or damaged?
Then you get the damage to the small intestine here. Like you will feel, I'm not sure how you will feel, but like I would imagine some aches, like stomach ache and stuff. But if the consequences of weak sphincter here are the same as weak esophageal sphincter, the small intestine gets damaged. But for some reason, most of the problems occur here and not here. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So to reiterate, digestion begins in the mouth. Remember that enzymes in saliva, I gave this example before, but I give it again. If you take a bite out of the rye bread and chew it for a while, then the rye bread, which is by itself is not sweet, will start, and I'm talking German rye, like really rye bread without the sugar addition. The rye bread will start tasting sweet. And it's because the saliva contains this enzyme called amylase. I believe I will mention it at some point. Well, not yet, I guess, or I've mentioned it before. And this enzyme, it breaks down the complete, the more complex carbohydrates into simpler carbohydrates. And one of the simple carbohydrates is glucose, and the glucose tastes sweet. So the complex carbohydrate in the rye bread, if you chew them long enough, if you expose them to the saliva long enough, then it will start tasting sweet. So the tongue, the teeth and the tongue, they help make the food particles smaller, and the tongue itself also helps push the food to the back of the mouth, to the back of the mouth, and assists us in swallowing it and pushing it down into the esophagus. So, and I mentioned already that the trachea closes and the food passes through the esophagus to the stomach. So the digestion continues in the stomach. The stomach contains hydrochloric acid, which helps soften the food and release obtain the nutrients from the food. In the stomach is aligned with the smooth muscles which move, and this movement is called peristalsis. And peristalsis is churning. Basically, is another word for peristalsis, and it helps mechanically digest food. The small intestine, from the stomach, food moves into the small intestine, and within the small intestine digests and absorbs nutrients. So the small intestine is a long tubular organ lined with a highly folded layer of epithelial cells that maximize the surface area absorbing the nutrients from food. So this is the close-up to the cross section of the lining of the small intestine. Okay, we see that there are lots of folds of epithelial tissue, and these folds are kind of have these little bitty tentacles called villi. And these little bitty tentacles, they are the structures that absorb the nutrients from the food. And these folds, they kind of facilitate the high surface area of the surface that absorbs the nutrients. So these cells produce enzymes that break down sugar polymers, and blood capillaries in here. Blood capillaries absorb the digested carbohydrates and protein, whereas lymph capillaries absorb lymph vessels and lymph capillaries over here, they absorb digested fats. Okay, I'm gonna take a look at the chat, and Amal is asking, can you go back to the previous slide real quick with the mouth on it? What about it, Amal? I'm gonna go back. Did you have a specific question about this slide, Amal? Oh, I'm gonna post the notes and then the video. So you can revise it then. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time. So if you have questions about things as I go through them, I'm happy to answer it. But if you just want me to repeat the things that I've mentioned before, I would, at this point, I would advise you to rewatch this piece on the video. All right. So the digestive enzymes in the small intestine come from the pancreas. We have trypsin and chymotrypsin, and these two enzymes, they break down polypeptides, which is another name for which kind of chemical? Does anybody remember? What is polypeptide? What is another name for it?
Proteins.
Proteins, exactly right, Madeline, thank you. Now, amylase will digest starch. Amylase also is produced by the pancreas, and lipase will help break down fats. So lipase is secreted by the pancreas, and alkaline sodium bicarbonate is also secreted by the pancreas. And what it does, it neutralizes the acid from the stomach. Okay, so the food that exits from the stomach into the small intestine, it contains a lot of acid, okay? And sodium bicarbonate neutralizes this acid. So if you have trouble with the pancreas, and you will likely have trouble secreting these digestive enzymes. So one of the immediate effects you will feel is the pain, which will be caused by the lack of sodium bicarbonate, which would neutralize the acid of the food exiting from the stomach. And apart from that, you will have, if you have problems with the pancreas, you will have trouble breaking down fats, trouble breaking down starches, and trouble breaking down proteins. So lots of digestive problems if you have problems with the pancreas. Now, the liver is another digestive organ that helps break down fats. So the liver produces bile, which is a biochemical that emulsifies or breaks down. It's like breaks it down into smaller particles. Fats into globules that mix with water. Lots of big words here. So emulsifies means breaks down the molecule from the larger size molecules into smaller molecules, and globules is just the shape of the fats after they've been emulsified. And so the bile is stored in the gallbladder. And the gallbladder is actually the structure that releases the bile into the small intestine. So by helping fat mix with water, bile allows lipid digestion enzymes or lipases to work efficiently. And finally, the small intestine digests most molecules. So most of the nutrients that are absorbed in our body are absorbed in the small intestine. And remember, the structure that actually absorbs these nutrients are called villi. They're little bitty tentacle-like structure in the epithelium of the small intestine. So sometimes when the gallbladder does not drain bile very efficiently, a person may get gallstones. And if a person gets gallstones, if the gallstones are large enough, then they may cause pain and discomfort, especially after eating fatty foods. And the usual treatment for that is basically remove the gallbladder. Technically, once the gallbladder removes, you don't die. Your life may get more uncomfortable whenever you eat fatty foods, but beats the constant pain from the gallstones. My mother-in-law had her gallbladder removed, and she's totally fine apart from when she eats fatty foods. But there are enzymes for that. Like there are certain kind of supplements that she takes that helps her. Ava asks, does digestion primarily occur in the small intestine rather than in the stomach? Digestion primarily occurs in the stomach, whereas nutrient absorption, well, nah, you know what? Digestion occurs both in the stomach and the small intestine. So in the stomach, the acid helps digest, soften the food and kind of turn it into a more liquid and uniform liquid state. But within the small intestine, digestion, I would say the digestion continues. It starts, well, digestion really starts in the mouth because of the amylase that helps break down carbohydrates. But in the stomach, like most of the heavy duty digestion starts and it continues in the small intestine. So in the stomach, the acid is responsible for digestion, whereas in the small intestine, the enzymes from the pancreas and the liver are responsible for digestion. And it is 10:20. Geez, that the time went fast. It goes faster and faster. Okay, guys, if there are any last minute question, let's discuss them now. Otherwise, we'll continue this. We'll finish this up on Friday. So I'm gonna turn to no participation today. Juliana asks, will the information from today and Friday be on the exam Monday, or we already cover everything? We've already covered everything for the exam. None of the information from today or Friday will be on the exam. And again, the study guides have been posted, so take a look in the web course announcements. There's a document waiting for you with the study guide for exam 2. All right, guys, thanks for joining in, and I'll see you on Friday.